Deep in the mist-covered mountains of Turkey, hundreds of identical Gothic castles sit entirely abandoned in thick fog.
A slow gaze across these decaying, uniform rooftops reveals peeling white paint and aggressive creeping dark moss. Once promising absolute luxury and royal elegance, these shattered wooden doors now invite only the howling mountain wind. Stepping inside, the vast, empty living rooms sit tragically stripped to bare concrete, covered in thick, undisturbed dust. Nature is relentlessly and silently wrapping its dark vines around the heavily cracked and ornate stone balustrades. What were originally designed to be pristine private swimming pools now hold absolutely nothing but stagnant, dark rainwater. Framed against the terrifying stormy sky, these identical mini-castles loom menacingly like the skeletal remains of a dream. Looking down row after endless row of deserted, identical streets creates a terrifying atmosphere that is completely silent. Hidden far below the surface, dark and heavily flooded basements conceal floating debris in the freezing, murky water. Golden dust particles dance slowly in the faint beams of sunlight, piercing through the rusty, completely shattered glass. It is a breathtaking yet ghostly valley, a colossal monument to financial ruin slowly erasing itself from maps.
Rising dominantly above the vibrant, bustling streets of Bangkok stands a massive, entirely unfinished, dark concrete monolith.
As we slowly ascend the sheer brutalist facade, exposed rusting rebar and creeping black mold reveal its decay. Walking cautiously down these pitch-black, heavily flooded hallways feels exactly like stepping into an absolute, inescapable urban nightmare. A massively heavy, rusted industrial construction crane still hangs precariously at the very edge of the towering roof. High above the sprawling metropolis, shattered glass panels and wild ferns aggressively reclaim the abandoned luxury concrete floors. Vandalized and deeply crumbling classical Roman columns stand guard over a desolate entrance that will never welcome guests. Open, completely unprotected, and pitch-black elevator shafts drop endlessly into a terrifying, echoing darkness that you cannot escape. The howling urban wind continuously sweeps through the bare, exposed concrete floors, singing a chilling, lonely song. Rusty, desperately collapsing metal scaffolding clings hopelessly to the grim exterior of a dream that died decades ago. Whenever the heavy monsoon rains fall, deep water cascades violently through the exposed lobby like a forgotten river. Completely surrounded by glowing neon city lights, the Sathorn unique tower remains a terrifying, absolutely dead urban void. Deep beneath the scorching Texas desert lies the dusty, overgrown entrance to a catastrophic $20 billion scientific failure. These massive, echoing, and heavily flooded underground tunnels were designed to unlock the absolute deepest secrets of our universe. Now, massive tunnel-boring machines sit heavily rusted, partially submerged, and completely abandoned in the cold, unforgiving dirt. Vertical concrete ventilation shafts plunge straight downward into the dark, constantly dripping with freezing, potentially toxic underground water. Thick industrial electrical cables hang uselessly like severed, rotting black veins from the cracking concrete ceiling far above. Faint, ghostly beams of harsh desert sunlight barely pierce through dangerous surface cracks, illuminating the slowly leaking walls. The main control center sits entirely vandalized, its rusted metal desks violently stripped of all their advanced technology. Up on the scorching surface, the relentless desert wind continuously blows sand directly into the decaying concrete bunkers. Faded, heavily oxidized, and unreadable metal warning signs are the absolute only remaining clues to what this facility was. Deep down in the darkness, stagnant, toxic green water pools endlessly in the completely forgotten lower levels today. From the air, the massive, deeply scarred excavation trench has been quietly reclaimed by the unforgiving Texas scrubland. Dominating the bleak skyline of Pyongyang is a colossal, entirely empty concrete pyramid known as the Hotel of Doom. A heavily rusted construction crane sits helplessly stuck at its towering apex, silently mocking the secretive regime's ambition. Massive, completely empty triangular windows stare out blankly like hollow, dead eyes over the sprawling, surprisingly silent city. Hidden deep inside this monolith lies a dark, seemingly infinite concrete stairwell filled with thick dust and shadows. Thick morning fog frequently rolls over the incredibly sharp peak, giving the brutalist structure a deeply sinister aura. The once grand entrance plaza is entirely overgrown, its massive concrete slabs heavily cracked and reclaimed by wild weeds. Heavily rusted, thick security entrance gates remain tightly chained shut, ensuring no uninvited person ever steps foot inside. If you somehow managed to enter, you would only find a vast, terrifyingly echoing lobby stripped to concrete. Thick dust swirls violently inside the dark elevator cores that have amazingly never seen a single paying passenger. As the sun sets, this dark, monolithic concrete pyramid casts a terrifying shadow of absolute, undeniable urban isolation. It stands completely out of place against the horizon, an abandoned giant towering over a highly secretive nation. What exactly happens when a massive place built for absolute joy is suddenly left to rot in a forest? Rusted roller coaster carts sit hopelessly stuck on dangerous wooden loops, their once bright paint completely faded by harsh rain. Creepy, heavily cracked fiberglass mascot statues hide silently in the tall grass, unblinkingly watching the completely empty pathways. Aggressive dark green vines are methodically swallowing the beautiful carousel rides that once loudly echoed with joyful laughter. The decaying ticket booths stand completely vandalized, entirely surrounded by shattered glass and heavily overgrown vegetation trying to hide them. Giant teacup rides with badly chipped paint are now functioning merely as sad vessels for stagnant, dark rainwater. A fake fairy tale castle ruin stands heavily weathered, deeply dark, and surprisingly menacing against the thick morning fog. The rotting facade of the entirely abandoned haunted house attraction has genuinely become a terrifying, real-life nightmare today. Shattered, incredibly dirty funhouse mirrors now sadly reflect absolutely nothing but the unstoppable decay of a lost wonderland. The fading sunset light hits the rusted, skeletal, and highly unstable remains of the massive Ferris wheel forever. Today, it is a massive, completely overgrown graveyard of forgotten memories, fully reclaimed by the silent.
Perched ominously on a snowy, freezing peak in Bulgaria sits a ruined concrete monument looking exactly like a UFO.
Today, the freezing winter snow falls freely and beautifully through the completely collapsed, rusted dome roof high above. Ruined, deeply faded mosaics of forgotten communist leaders crumble slowly off the curved, heavily weathered interior concrete walls. A bullet-riddled, rusted red star still sits proudly atop the towering concrete structure, stubbornly defying the harsh elements. The circular interior corridors are completely pitch black, surprisingly dangerous, and entirely filled with incredibly heavy, fallen concrete debris. Heavy, colorful graffiti now entirely covers the once glorious, polished marble pillars of this fallen, historically significant political regime. During the absolutely brutal winter months, thick frozen ice heavily pools across the deeply cracked concrete main floor. The howling, freezing mountain wind tears aggressively through the completely shattered, extremely dangerous panoramic window frames overlooking valleys. Every single inch of this incredible brutalist concrete masterpiece is heavily weathering, aggressively spalling, and slowly, undeniably dying. When caught in the middle of a blinding blizzard, the dark silhouette of this imposing monument is truly terrifying. It remains entirely isolated and incredibly mystical, a ghostly echo of a forgotten empire lost in the freezing fog. Imagine flying over incredibly wide, pristine multi-lane highways that are completely empty, featuring nothing but slowly cracking asphalt. Ciudad Valdeluz was optimistically built for 30,000 people, but these completely unfinished brick apartment blocks remain bare. Wild, untamed grass is rapidly and successfully taking over the giant city roundabouts meant for incredibly heavy traffic. Brightly colorful children's playground equipment sits sadly fading and rusting away, having never been used by a child. Rusted, completely useless streetlights perfectly line the sprawling, totally empty residential boulevards that ultimately lead to absolutely nowhere. Tumbleweeds literally blow across the incredibly dusty, entirely abandoned parking lots in this eerie, highly unsettling desert landscape. The badly sun-bleached, entirely empty exterior of the massive shopping mall facade feels incredibly surreal and wrong today. Completely shattered, heavy glass doors uselessly guard an empty, heavily vandalized supermarket that tragically never had the chance to open. Flying a drone low down these incredibly deserted, highly ghostly neighborhood streets feels exactly like the world's end. The beautiful setting sun currently casts incredibly long, highly dramatic shadows across the completely desolate, golden hour skyline. It is an incredibly vast, entirely uninhabited ghost city, serving as a colossal victim of devastating economic collapse. Hidden incredibly deep within a massive mountain face are completely overgrown, heavily classified solid concrete military blast doors. Inside, pitch black, deeply echoing underground aircraft tunnels were specifically designed by engineers to survive a direct nuclear strike. Now, the completely stripped and rusting metal fuselage of an abandoned MiG fighter jet decays in total darkness. Deep, heavily contaminated, and incredibly toxic water permanently floods the floors of these dark, debris-filled underground storage hangars. Outside the mountain, the massive concrete takeoff runways have been completely destroyed, heavily cratered, and covered in moss. The heavily scorched, entirely empty walls of the deep underground command center tell a terrifying story of destruction. A single flashlight beam suddenly reveals toxic mineral stalactites dripping continuously from the rapidly deteriorating, cracked tunnel ceilings. Massive industrial ventilation fans, once absolutely essential for human survival, are completely rusted solid and forever frozen perfectly. Above ground, the dense, highly aggressive forest is doing absolutely everything it can to completely swallow the entrances. Scattered, heavily corroded military gear debris is absolutely all that currently remains of this highly secretive underground fortress. The deeply looming, incredibly dark silhouette of the mountain perfectly and silently guards its dark secrets against time. An incredible aerial view completely reveals the heavily cratered, totally abandoned concrete taxiways leading directly into the mountain. Positioned incredibly high above the sprawling forests of Berlin sit the deeply torn white radar domes of Teufelsberg. Ripped, highly degraded canvas material blows violently and constantly in the unforgiving wind, creating a truly unsettling noise. Dark, heavily vandalized, and incredibly steep concrete stairwells ascend blindly into the incredibly eerie structures of the massive towers. The highly ruined observation deck offers a truly stunning panoramic view, but it feels incredibly, surprisingly dangerously exposed. Dangerous, heavily rusted, and highly unstable metal scaffolding continues to completely surround the rapidly decaying domes, threatening collapse. The incredibly empty, deeply echoing interior halls have been entirely stripped and are now covered in chaotic graffiti. Broken, deeply bent, and heavily rusted communication antennas point entirely uselessly toward the generally gray, deeply unforgiving sky. Exactly at sunset, the slowly dying light makes the deeply torn white domes glow with an undeniably eerie presence. Inside the towers, deeply creepy shadows stretch and violently dance across the completely empty walls as winds howl. Vibrant, highly peeling street art creates an incredibly stark contrast against the heavily decaying, entirely gray brutalist concrete. It officially remains a completely isolated, highly historic complex, slowly being swallowed completely by the dense German woods. Sitting completely alone in the deep, dark ocean is a massive concrete ruin shaped exactly like a naval battleship. Massive, incredibly violent ocean waves constantly and aggressively crash against the heavily battered, deeply cracked concrete seawalls. Inside the perimeter, incredibly cramped, decaying brutalist concrete apartment blocks stand densely packed together and remain entirely silent. Collapsed, completely rotting wooden balconies hang incredibly perilously from the sides of these terrifying, deeply decaying residential blocks. The incredibly claustrophobic central courtyards are completely overgrown with wild nature, filled absolutely to the brim with concrete rubble. Abandoned, deeply haunting classrooms still hold incredibly dusty wooden desks, waiting endlessly for innocent students who will never return. Heavy, highly industrial coal mining equipment rests permanently near the incredibly deep vertical shafts, rusted completely solid today. Navigating the pitch black, incredibly narrow, and deeply claustrophobic concrete stairwells feels deeply terrifying and completely oppressive to experience. Completely shattered, vintage tube televisions sit oxidizing heavily on the incredibly damp floors, serving as sad, forgotten remnants. Incredibly powerful typhoon winds whip extremely dangerously and loudly through the completely empty, heavily crumbling exterior concrete corridors. An entirely abandoned, deeply weathered, and incredibly fragile wooden Shinto shrine quietly faces the harsh elements completely alone.
As the beautiful sun finally sets, this incredibly ghostly island stands completely alone as the ultimate symbol of forgotten humanity.